You walk into a room and immediately feel the tension crackling beneath polite smiles. Nobody said a word, yet you know exactly what's happening, while others remain oblivious. Sound familiar? This isn't intuition. It's perception that cuts through the elaborate theater most people mistake for reality. While others get swept up in workplace drama, family politics, or social media performances, you see the scripts everyone's unconsciously following. You recognize that the serious discussions about promotions, the heated debates over trivial matters, even the carefully curated online personas are all roles in a game where most players don't realize they're performing. Thoth, the ancient Egyptian god of wisdom, understood this burden intimately. He knew that seeing beyond society's collective agreements, recognizing that titles, hierarchies, and social rules are simply shared illusions, creates profound isolation. You become an outsider to the very systems everyone else treats as absolute truth. More people are experiencing this awakening now than ever before, but most suppress these insights to avoid the uncomfortable reality of standing apart. Understanding how to navigate this gift without losing your sanity changes everything. Look around you right now. Everything you see that defines human civilization, the money in your wallet, the clock on your wall, the very concept of the country you live in, exists only because we collectively agree it does. This isn't philosophy. This is the most practical truth you'll ever encounter. Take that $20 bill in your pocket. Strip away our collective agreement. And what are you holding? Cotton fiber and ink. That's it. There's no intrinsic value hiding in those green fibers. No magical property that makes it worth 20 units of anything. Yet this piece of decorated paper can buy you lunch, pay for gas, or contribute to your rent. Why? Because roughly 330 million Americans have agreed to participate in the same financial hallucination. But here's what's remarkable. This agreement is so powerful that people will work 40 hours a week for these cotton rectangles. They'll sacrifice time with their families, endure jobs they despise, and structure their entire existence around accumulating more of these symbolic tokens. The agreement has become more real to us than reality itself. Consider what happened in Germany during the 1920 seconds. Overnight, their collective agreement about money's value collapsed. People literally needed wheelbarrows full of cash to buy bread. The paper hadn't changed, same cotton, same ink. But the shared belief evaporated, and with it, the entire foundation of economic life. Millions of people discovered that their life savings were worth less than the paper they were printed on. Time operates under the same principle. You wake up to an alarm clock, rush to be somewhere by 9 a.m., eat lunch at noon, and feel guilty if you're 5 minutes late. But step back and ask yourself, what exactly is time measuring? The universe doesn't care about your Monday morning meeting. Stars don't punch time clocks. The cosmos operates on cycles of birth, growth, decay, and renewal that have nothing to do with the arbitrary divisions we've carved into existence. Ancient civilizations organized their lives around natural rhythms: sunrise, sunset, seasons, lunar cycles. They worked when there was light, rested when darkness came, and celebrated when harvests were ready. Then we invented the clock and convinced ourselves that 9 to 5 was somehow natural law. We created an artificial structure and then became slaves to our own invention. Think about how this plays out in your daily life. You feel stressed when you're running late, even though late is a completely human concept. You feel productive when you accomplish tasks within designated time blocks, even though the tasks themselves could be done at any pace. We've trained ourselves to live inside a temporal prison that exists nowhere except in our collective imagination. Nations represent perhaps the most dramatic example of shared reality construction. Draw a line on a map, call it a border, and suddenly people will die defending that invisible boundary. I've stood at the border between countries where you can literally step across an imaginary line and suddenly be subject to completely different laws, currencies, and social expectations. The soil is identical on both sides. The air is the same. But the collective agreements are different, and those differences shape every aspect of human behavior. The American Revolution wasn't fought over physical territory. It was fought over competing ideas about governance, taxation, and representation. The colonists decided to stop participating in one collective agreement, British rule, and create a new one, American independence. The land didn't change. The people were the same. But the shared story transformed, and with it, the entire structure of society. Your career exists within this same framework of collective agreements. You have a job title that means something only because everyone in your industry has agreed it means something. You attend meetings that accomplish little beyond reinforcing the shared belief that meetings are important. You wear clothes that signal your professional status to others who've agreed that certain fabrics and cuts indicate competence or authority. I once knew a man who was a senior vice president of strategic initiatives at a major corporation. When I asked him what he actually did, he paused for a long moment and said, "I attend meetings about meetings and write reports that other people use to write more reports." He was earning 6 figures to participate in an elaborate performance that everyone pretended was essential, but nobody could quite explain. The most unsettling part isn't that these agreements exist, it's how invisible they become. We forget we're participating in a constructed reality and start believing our constructions are natural laws. We think money has inherent value, that time scarcity is real, that our job titles define our worth, and that the borders on maps represent fundamental divisions between human beings. When you begin to see through these agreements, something profound shifts. You're not becoming cynical or nihilistic, you're developing what I call constructive awareness. You recognize that these systems are tools we've created, not immutable truths we must accept. This recognition can be liberating, but it's also disorienting. Imagine discovering that the ground you've been standing on your entire life is actually a stage set. Everything still functions the same way, but now you know it's constructed. You can still participate in the performance, but you're no longer unconsciously trapped by it. You have choices you didn't realize existed. This awareness creates a peculiar form of social vertigo. When you're in a business meeting discussing quarterly projections, part of you recognizes that you're participating in an elaborate ritual that exists only because everyone agrees to take it seriously. When you're stressed about being late, you remember that punctuality is a social construction, not a moral imperative. When you see people arguing passionately about politics, you notice they're defending different versions of collective imagination. The challenge is that most people around you remain unconscious of this constructed nature of reality. They experience these agreements as solid, permanent, and unquestionable. This creates a gap between your perception and theirs that can feel isolating and overwhelming, which is why we share deeper insights about navigating this awareness through our free Insights Academy newsletter. For a limited time, subscribers also receive a complimentary ebook copy of the Kybalion, the ancient Hermetic text that reveals the fundamental principles governing these very phenomena of collective reality construction. Understanding the fragile architecture of collective reality is just the beginning. Once you see how these agreements shape human behavior, you begin to notice something else, how your newfound awareness affects every relationship and social interaction in your life. And that's where things get really interesting. Picture yourself watching a group of children playing Monopoly in your living room. At first, it's charming. They're moving their little metal tokens around the board, carefully counting out colorful paper money, negotiating trades with the seriousness of Wall Street executives. But as the game progresses, something shifts. Voices get louder. Accusations fly about cheating, about unfair advantages, about the rules being interpreted wrong. One child storms off in tears because they landed on boardwalk with a hotel. Another throws the dice across the room, screaming that the game is rigged. As an adult watching this unfold, you feel a mixture of amusement and bewilderment. You want to gently remind them that it's just cardboard and plastic. The money isn't real. The properties don't exist. The entire drama they're experiencing, the betrayal, the triumph, the devastating losses, it's all happening within the confines of a game that someone made up and put in a box. This is precisely the perspective shift that Thoth describes when someone begins to see through society's constructed realities. The same detached clarity you feel watching those children becomes your lens for observing human civilization. You start seeing the stock market crashes, the political campaigns, the social hierarchies, the desperate pursuit of status symbols, and you recognize the same pattern. Adults moving pieces around a board, following rules they didn't create, experiencing genuine anguish over outcomes in a game they never consciously agreed to play. The emotional journey of this awakening follows a predictable arc. Initially, there's that same amused bewilderment. You watch people fight viciously over promotions at jobs they hate, see them go into debt for weddings that last one day. Observe them choosing political sides like sports teams and defending their choices with religious fervor. The intensity people bring to these pursuits strikes you as simultaneously touching and absurd, like watching someone cry over a soap opera while knowing the actors are reading scripts. Then comes the compassion phase. You begin to understand that people aren't stupid or weak. They're playing the only game they know exists. They've invested their entire sense of identity in their roles. The executive genuinely believes his corner office defines his worth. The socialite truly feels that her charity galas give her life meaning. The political activist is convinced that their ideology will save the world. They're not pretending to care. They actually do care, deeply and authentically, because the game has become their reality. But here's where the real danger emerges for the truth teller. The moment you suggest to those Monopoly-playing children that they're getting upset over pieces of cardboard, you become the enemy. Not because they think you're wrong, but because you're threatening the very foundation of their experience. You're not just questioning their strategy or their luck, you're invalidating their entire emotional investment. History provides us with countless examples of this dynamic. When Galileo pointed his telescope at the heavens and announced that Earth wasn't the center of the universe, the fury directed at him wasn't really about astronomy. It was about the existential terror of discovering that humanity's entire cosmic significance had been built on an illusion. The geocentric worldview wasn't just a scientific theory, it was the foundation of religious doctrine, social hierarchy, and individual meaning. Galileo wasn't just correcting a mistake, he was demolishing a worldview. The same pattern played out when social reformers began questioning the divine right of kings, when abolitionists challenged the institution of slavery, when women's suffrage advocates suggested that political participation shouldn't be limited by gender. In each case, the messenger faced more hatred than the message itself, because they represented something far more threatening than a disagreement. They embodied the terrifying possibility that everything people had organized their lives around might be arbitrary. This phenomenon reveals a profound psychological truth. People often prefer familiar suffering to unfamiliar freedom. The known game, even if it's rigged against them, feels safer than the unknown territory beyond the game board. A factory worker might complain endlessly about their job but react with hostility when someone suggests that the entire concept of trading time for money is a social invention, not a law of nature. The complaint allows them to remain within the system while venting frustration. The alternative perspective threatens to dissolve the system entirely. Modern whistleblowers experience this same dynamic. When Edward Snowden revealed the extent of government surveillance, the public reaction split predictably. Some people thanked him for the information, but others directed their anger at him personally, not for lying, but for telling an uncomfortable truth that forced them to reconsider their assumptions about privacy, security, and the nature of their relationship with authority. He became a scapegoat, blamed for spoiling the collective sense of safety rather than thanked for revealing its illusory nature. Artists and creatives often find themselves in similar positions. When a filmmaker creates work that challenges social norms, when a musician writes songs that question popular narratives, when a writer explores themes that make people uncomfortable, they frequently face accusations of being divisive, negative, or destructive. The hostility isn't really about the quality of their work. It's about their role as disturbers of consensus reality. This response isn't personal, though it certainly feels that way when you're on the receiving end. It's a predictable, almost mechanical reaction that occurs whenever someone disturbs a shared trance. The people lashing out aren't necessarily malicious. They're protecting something they perceive as essential to their survival. When you question the game, you're not just offering information, you're threatening their identity, their sense of purpose, their understanding of how the world works. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for anyone who finds themselves seeing through societal illusions. The isolation that comes with this perspective isn't a punishment or a sign that you're wrong, it's an inevitable consequence of stepping outside the collective agreement. But within this isolation lies a profound gift, the freedom to observe without being consumed, to participate without being trapped, to engage with the human drama, while remembering that the stage and the costumes are temporary constructions. The children will eventually finish their game of Monopoly, put the pieces back in the box, and move on to something else. The question becomes, will you spend your life fighting over the properties, or will you remember that you're playing with cardboard and plastic? In the sacred halls of ancient Egypt's mystery schools, Thoth's priests understood something that would echo through millennia. Those who perceive truth first are rarely welcomed with open arms. They developed elaborate initiation processes not just to preserve sacred knowledge, but to protect the initiates themselves. The priests knew that revealing the interconnectedness of all things, that the gods, the pharaoh, and the common farmer were expressions of the same divine consciousness, would threaten the very foundations of Egyptian society. So they waited, sometimes decades, before sharing the deepest teachings. They had witnessed what happened to those who spoke too soon. This wasn't unique to Egypt. Every civilization has followed the same brutal pattern. The seer speaks truth, society rejects it violently, then eventually adopts it as obvious wisdom. It's so consistent that you can almost set your calendar by it. Take Socrates, wandering the streets of Athens asking simple questions that made people profoundly uncomfortable. What is justice? What is virtue? How do we know what we know? These weren't abstract philosophical exercises. They were direct challenges to the shared agreements that held Athenian society together. Remember what we discussed about those fragile architectures of collective reality? Socrates was poking holes in them, one question at a time. The Athenians didn't execute him for being wrong. They killed him for being right in a way that threatened their comfortable assumptions. His crime wasn't impiety. It was forcing people to examine the arbitrary nature of their beliefs. Sound familiar? It's the same dynamic we explored with the children's board game, except the stakes were a man's life. Fast forward to Galileo, peering through his telescope and seeing moons orbiting Jupiter. The evidence was right there, observable and measurable, yet the church branded him a heretic. Why? Because accepting that Earth wasn't the center of the universe meant acknowledging that human beings weren't the center of God's attention. It meant questioning the entire hierarchical structure that placed the Pope as God's representative on the specially chosen planet. One astronomical observation threatened to topple centuries of carefully constructed authority. The pattern becomes even more poignant when you look at artists. Vincent van Gogh sold exactly one painting during his lifetime. One. He died in poverty and madness, his vision of reality so far ahead of his contemporaries that they literally couldn't see what he was showing them. Today, his Starry Night hangs in the Museum of Modern Art, and physicists studying turbulent flow patterns find that his swirling skies actually capture mathematical principles that weren't formally understood until decades after his death. He was seeing the underlying patterns of reality itself. But here's what's truly fascinating. The psychological mechanism behind this rejection is always the same. When someone presents a new way of seeing reality, it forces everyone else to confront an uncomfortable possibility that their current understanding might be incomplete or wrong. This creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, and the easiest way to resolve it isn't to examine new evidence, it's to dismiss the messenger. Think about the environmental scientists of the 1960 seconds and 70 seconds, warning about climate change and ecosystem collapse. They were labeled as doomsday prophets, tree-hugging extremists who wanted to destroy the economy. Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring about the dangers of pesticides, faced vicious personal attacks from the chemical industry. They tried to discredit her by calling her a hysterical woman who didn't understand real science. Today, her work is considered foundational environmental literature, and the pesticide DDT she warned about has been banned in most countries. The economists who predicted the 2008 financial crisis faced similar treatment. Nassim Taleb, who wrote about black swan events and systemic financial risks, was dismissed as a pessimist who didn't understand modern financial instruments. Michael Burry, who saw the housing bubble years before it burst, was mocked by his peers and investigated by the FBI for his unpatriotic bets against the American economy. When their predictions came true, suddenly everyone claimed they had seen it coming all along. This reveals something crucial about human consciousness that Thoth understood thousands of years ago. We're always operating one generation behind reality. The truths that seem obvious to us now were heretical to our parents. The insights that feel revolutionary to us will be common sense to our children. There's a deeper reason why this pattern persists. New perceptions don't just challenge ideas, they threaten power structures. When Copernicus suggested that Earth orbited the Sun, he wasn't just correcting astronomy. He was undermining the Church's claim to be the center of divine authority. When early feminists argued that women deserved equal rights, they weren't just advocating for fairness. They were challenging an entire economic and social system built on unpaid female labor. The loneliness of being ahead of collective understanding is profound. Imagine being the first person in your village to understand that diseases spread through contaminated water, while everyone else believes illness comes from bad air or divine punishment. You watch people you care about getting sick from preventable causes, but your explanations sound like nonsense to them. This is the burden that every genuine seer carries. Yet history offers hope. The pattern that begins with ridicule and persecution almost always ends with vindication. The key is understanding that truth has its own timeline, independent of social acceptance. Mendel's laws of genetics were ignored for 35 years before being rediscovered. Semmelweis, who proved that hand-washing prevented childbed fever, was driven to a mental breakdown by medical colleagues who refused to accept his findings. Today, his insights form the foundation of modern hygiene. If you're someone who sees patterns others miss, who notices connections that seem invisible to those around you, take heart in this historical perspective. The same vision that makes you feel isolated today might be exactly what the world needs tomorrow. The discomfort others feel when you share your insights isn't necessarily a sign that you're wrong. It might be evidence that you're touching something real and important. The question isn't whether your perceptions will eventually be understood. The question is whether you have the patience and courage to maintain your vision while the world catches up. Understanding this pattern doesn't make the journey easier, but it does make it meaningful. You're participating in the eternal human process of expanding consciousness, one uncomfortable truth at a time. Listen carefully to what Thoth warned about next, because this might be the most dangerous trap of all. He said the ego is infinitely cunning, and just when you think you've escaped its grasp, it finds a way to reclaim you. The moment you begin to see through society's illusions, when you recognize the children's game for what it is, your ego whispers seductively, "Finally, you're awake. Look at all these sleeping fools around you." And just like that, liberation becomes another prison. I've watched this happen countless times. Someone discovers that mainstream media manipulates narratives, that education systems condition compliance, that consumer culture breeds emptiness. They feel the exhilaration of seeing clearly for the first time. But then something shifts. The recognition that others are asleep morphs into, "I am better than others." The very separation and judgment that true seeing dissolves gets reconstructed with the person now positioning themselves as the enlightened one looking down at the masses. You know these people. Maybe you've been one of them. The cynic who can't let anyone enjoy a movie without pointing out its propaganda. The friend who responds to every shared enthusiasm with, "You do realize that's just corporate manipulation, right?" They've appointed themselves the designated dream crusher, the person who must constantly remind others that their joy is based on illusion. Then there's the preacher, not necessarily religious, but anyone who insists everyone else is blind while they alone can see. They corner people at parties, flood social media with wake-up posts, and treat every conversation as an opportunity to enlighten the ignorant. Their genuine insights get weaponized into a bludgeon they use to beat people over the head with their own superiority. Perhaps most insidious is the withdrawn intellectual who declares themselves above the petty concerns of ordinary people. They roll their eyes at birthday parties, dismiss romantic relationships as biological programming, and sneer at anyone who finds meaning in traditions or celebrations. They've confused cynicism with wisdom, isolation with enlightenment. Here's what Thoth understood that these people miss. This superiority complex is actually another form of unconsciousness. It's the ego hijacking genuine insights and claiming ownership of them. The irony is devastating. The very awareness that should humble you instead inflates you. I've seen this pattern repeat endlessly in spiritual and intellectual communities. The meditation teacher who started with genuine compassion gradually becomes authoritarian, convinced their students can't function without constant guidance. The academic who began researching to understand truth becomes condescending, treating anyone outside their field as intellectually inferior. The activist who initially fought for justice becomes self-righteous, unable to work with anyone who doesn't share their exact ideology. The pattern is always the same. Authentic insight gets corrupted by the ego's need to be special, to be right, to be superior. But here's what true seeing actually does. It increases compassion and humility. When you really understand how consciousness works, you recognize that everyone is doing their best with their current level of awareness. That person scrolling mindlessly through social media isn't lazy or stupid. They're seeking connection and stimulation in the only way they currently know how. That friend who stays in an obviously unhealthy relationship isn't weak. They're operating from learned patterns about love and worth that made sense given their history. Real wisdom makes you more human, not less. More willing to acknowledge your own mistakes. More gentle with others' limitations. More playful about your own insights. You start to see your previous certainties as stepping stones rather than final destinations. The moment you believe you're more awake than others, you've fallen asleep to your own arrogance. It's like the person who brags about being humble. The claim itself contradicts the quality they're claiming to possess. I remember studying with a teacher who embodied what Thoth called beginner's mind. Despite decades of study and profound insights, she approached every conversation with genuine curiosity. She'd ask questions like she really didn't know the answers. She'd get excited about ideas as if encountering them for the first time. She maintained what she called useful ignorance, the recognition that the mystery of existence always exceeds our understanding of it. The real sage never claims to be a sage. They're too busy being amazed by how much they don't know. This isn't false modesty or strategic humility. It's the natural result of genuine seeing. The deeper you go into understanding reality, the more you realize how vast and mysterious it actually is. Your insights feel less like personal achievements and more like gifts you happen to receive. Think about it this way. If you discovered a beautiful garden that had been hidden from view, would you stand at the entrance mocking everyone who hadn't found it yet? Or would you be so enchanted by the beauty that you'd naturally want to share it, to invite others in, to explore it together? The trap of superiority keeps you standing at that entrance, focused on who's inside versus who's outside, rather than actually enjoying the garden you found. So how do you recognize and avoid this trap in your own journey? First, pay attention to your internal dialogue about others. When you catch yourself thinking, "These people are so asleep," or "Nobody understands what I understand," pause. That's your ego, trying to co-opt your awareness. Second, notice if your insights are making you more loving or more judgmental. Authentic wisdom increases your capacity for compassion, patience, and understanding. If your awakening is making you more critical, more isolated, or more frustrated with others, something has gone sideways. Third, maintain what Thoth called the student's heart. Stay curious. Keep asking questions. Remain surprised by what you discover. The moment you think you've figured it all out is the moment you stop growing. The path of seeing clearly isn't about becoming superior to others. It's about becoming more fully yourself, more genuinely human, more authentically connected to the mystery we're all swimming in together. Now here's where Thoth's wisdom becomes truly revolutionary. After warning us about the trap of superiority, he reveals something that changes everything. Seeing through the illusion doesn't mean you have to leave the stage. You don't have to become a hermit or withdraw from life. Instead, you learn to dance. Picture a dancer who knows she will die tomorrow. Does this knowledge make her dance less? Does she hold back, move cautiously, or sit out the performance? No. She dances more beautifully, more wildly, more present than ever before. Every movement becomes precious because she's no longer taking the performance for granted. She's not dancing to impress anyone or to build a career. She's dancing because the music is playing and her body can move. This is how Thoth teaches us to live once we see through the dream. You still show up to work, but you don't confuse your job title with who you are. You still love people, but you don't mistake possession for affection. You still pursue goals, but you don't treat outcomes as measures of your worth. The difference is profound. You're playing your role while knowing it's theater. I learned this lesson the hard way during my own corporate years. I was so attached to being successful that every setback felt like death. Missing a promotion wasn't just disappointing, it was an attack on my identity. Losing a client wasn't just business, it was personal failure. I was drowning in a job that was supposed to be just one aspect of my life. Then, something shifted. I started seeing the office dynamics as a fascinating social experiment. The politics, the posturing, the desperate scrambling for recognition. It all became theater. But here's the surprising part. I didn't become cynical or disengaged. I actually became better at my job. When you're not desperately clinging to results, you can appreciate the process more fully. You can take creative risks because failure isn't existential anymore. This lightness transforms everything. In relationships, you can love more freely when you're not trying to control or possess others. You stop seeing your partner as a reflection of your worth or a solution to your problems. Instead, you appreciate them as a fellow actor in this cosmic play, doing their best with their own script and limitations. One of my clients, Sarah, discovered this during her divorce. Instead of viewing her ex-husband as the villain who ruined her story, she began seeing him as someone playing his role as best he could with the programming he'd received. This didn't mean she accepted bad behavior or stayed in a harmful situation. It meant she could navigate the divorce without destroying herself with resentment. She could protect her interests while maintaining her humanity. But let's address the elephant in the room. Many people fear that seeing through illusions leads to apathy or nihilism. If nothing really matters, why try? This is a fundamental misunderstanding. When you're no longer motivated by fear, status, or external validation, you're free to engage more authentically. You're not trying to prove anything or escape anything. You're simply responding to what life presents with curiosity and presence. Think about children at play. They're completely absorbed in their games, even though they know it's just pretend. The dragon isn't real, but the joy of slaying it is genuine. The tea party is imaginary, but the connection with friends is authentic. They're not confused about the nature of play, yet they engage fully. This is the secret Thoth reveals: full engagement without desperate attachment. This perspective revolutionizes creativity and work. When I stopped being attached to being right or successful as a writer, my work became more interesting. I could explore ideas that might fail spectacularly because failure was no longer a threat to my identity. I could write about controversial topics because I wasn't dependent on everyone's approval for my sense of worth. The lightness doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care differently. When my father was diagnosed with cancer, I didn't think, well, it's all an illusion anyway, so this doesn't matter. Instead, I was present with him in a way I'd never been before. I wasn't trying to fix the situation or deny its reality. I was simply there, loving him without the desperate attachment to outcomes that had previously made such situations unbearable. This is crucial to understand. The lightness doesn't mean not caring about temporary circumstances. It means not being destroyed by them. Job loss becomes an opportunity to reassess, rather than a catastrophe. Relationship endings become transitions rather than failures. Health problems become teachers rather than enemies. You still feel sadness, fear, and disappointment. You're human after all, but these emotions pass through you instead of defining you. Maintaining this perspective requires practice and patience with yourself. Some days you'll forget and get caught up in the drama. You'll find yourself desperately attached to outcomes, taking everything personally, confusing your role with your identity. This is normal. The key is to notice when it happens and gently return to the dance. I keep a simple reminder on my desk. What would this look like if I were playing? It's amazing how this question transforms situations. Traffic jams become meditation opportunities. Difficult conversations become improv exercises. Setbacks become plot twists in an interesting story. The beautiful paradox is that when you hold everything lightly, life becomes more enjoyable, not less. Colors seem brighter when you're not desperately trying to capture them. Relationships feel richer when you're not clinging to them. Work becomes more fulfilling when you're not using it to validate your existence. You're learning to dance in the dream, fully engaged but not enslaved, committed but not desperate, caring but not attached. This is the art of living lightly, and it's perhaps the most radical act of all, choosing joy and presence in a world obsessed with control and outcomes. The invitation is simple: start practicing this lightness today. Pick one area of your life where you're desperately attached to an outcome and experiment with holding it more lightly. See what shifts when you engage fully while remembering it's all part of the dance. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with seeing what others don't, a profound isolation that nobody warns you about when you first start questioning the nature of reality. It's the loneliness of being awake in a world of dreamers, carrying insights that feel too precious and too fragile to share with most people around you. If you've felt this, you're not imagining it. This isolation is real, and it's one of the genuine costs of expanded awareness. When you begin to perceive the deeper currents running beneath everyday life, when you recognize the dreamlike quality of what most people consider solid reality, you often find yourself standing on the outside of conversations, relationships, and social gatherings that once felt natural. Think about the last time you sat through small talk about celebrity gossip or office politics while your mind was wrestling with questions about the nature of consciousness or the meaning of existence. There's this strange disconnect, like you're an anthropologist observing the rituals of a culture you no longer fully belong to. The conversations feel hollow, not because the people are hollow, but because you're aware of dimensions they're not discussing. You find yourself nodding along to discussions about problems that seem to miss the deeper issue entirely. Solutions that address symptoms while ignoring root causes. Family dinners become exercises in translation. Your relatives worry about things that seem almost quaint from your expanded perspective, while the concerns that keep you awake at night, the nature of reality, the purpose of suffering, the interconnectedness of all things, sound like abstract philosophy to them. You learn to speak in two languages, the surface language that maintains relationships, and the deeper language of your actual experience. This is where many people who begin to see beyond conventional reality make a crucial mistake. They either become bitter, viewing others as hopelessly unconscious, or they withdraw entirely, deciding that meaningful connection is impossible. Both responses miss something essential that Thoth understood about the nature of awakening throughout history. The awakened have always found each other. Poets have always recognized poets, not necessarily through their published work, but through a quality of attention, a way of seeing that becomes apparent in how they notice light falling through windows or pause at certain moments of beauty. Seekers recognize seekers through their questions, through what they're curious about, through what makes them laugh and what makes them weep. There's a particular joy in that moment of recognition, what I call the silent smile that passes between two people who both understand that this is all a kind of cosmic play. You might be in a bookstore and catch someone's eye in the philosophy section, or find yourself in a conversation where someone casually mentions a concept that reveals they've been thinking about reality in ways that go far beyond the mainstream. In that instant, the loneliness lifts. You remember you're not the only one who's noticed that the emperor has no clothes, but finding your tribe requires strategy, especially in our fragmented modern world. The people who think like you don't necessarily live next door or work in your office. They might be scattered across different communities, different age groups, different walks of life. You have to become intentional about seeking them out. Certain books act like beacons. When you see someone reading particular authors, whether it's ancient wisdom texts, consciousness researchers, or contemporary philosophers exploring the nature of reality, you've found a potential kindred spirit. Bookstores, especially independent ones with well-curated philosophy and spirituality sections, become hunting grounds for meaningful connection. Spiritual communities can offer sanctuary, though you have to navigate carefully. Not every meditation group or philosophical discussion circle will resonate with your particular flavor of awakening. Some get stuck in dogma, others in endless seeking without integration. But when you find a community that balances genuine inquiry with practical wisdom, where people are doing the real work of transformation rather than just talking about it, you've found gold. Online spaces have created new possibilities for connection that didn't exist for previous generations of seekers. Forums dedicated to consciousness exploration, podcasts that tackle the big questions, virtual study groups examining ancient texts. These can provide lifelines when your physical environment feels spiritually barren. But remember that digital connection, while valuable, can't fully replace the energy exchange that happens when awakened people gather in person. Sometimes, though, you simply can't find your complete tribe. You might find individuals who understand certain aspects of your perspective, but nobody who gets the full picture. This is when you need strategies for carrying your vision alone without becoming bitter or withdrawing from life entirely. The key is remembering that consciousness recognizes itself wherever it appears, even in people who haven't fully awakened to their own nature. That colleague who makes surprisingly insightful observations, that neighbor who shows unusual compassion, that family member who asks deeper questions than usual. These are sparks of the same awareness you've cultivated, even if they haven't developed it as fully. Maintaining compassion for those who seem asleep becomes crucial for your own sanity. They're not inferior beings, they're simply at different stages of remembering who they really are. Many of them are carrying wounds or fears that make awakening feel dangerous. Others are so embedded in survival mode that they don't have the luxury of questioning reality's nature. Your job isn't to force their awakening, but to embody yours so completely that it creates permission for others to explore their own depths. This requires enormous patience, especially when you can see solutions to problems that others aren't ready to acknowledge exist. You might recognize that someone's relationship struggles stem from unconscious patterns they're not willing to examine, or that their career dissatisfaction reflects a deeper spiritual hunger they're afraid to acknowledge. Learning to offer your perspective gently, through questions rather than answers, through modeling rather than preaching, becomes an art form. Sometimes your role is to be a bridge, helping others expand their perception gradually through your example rather than overwhelming them with concepts they're not prepared to integrate. This means meeting people where they are, speaking their language while gently introducing ideas that might crack open their existing worldview just enough to let in new light. The universe itself becomes your companion during long stretches of feeling misunderstood. When you truly grasp that consciousness is the fundamental fabric of reality, you realize you're never actually alone. The same awareness looking through your eyes is looking through every pair of eyes, even when those other expressions of consciousness haven't recognized their own nature yet. Even in your most isolated moments, you're connected to every seeker who's ever lived, every mystic who's ever questioned the nature of existence, every poet who's ever tried to capture the ineffable in words. You're part of an invisible lineage of awakening that stretches across cultures and centuries. Your awakening isn't just for you, it's a gift you give to the collective consciousness of humanity, even when nobody around you seems to notice or appreciate it. Every moment you choose love over fear, presence over unconsciousness, wisdom over reactivity, you're contributing to the awakening of the whole. That's not consolation prize thinking. That's the deeper truth about how consciousness evolves. The solitude of seeing is real, but it's not permanent. Your tribe is out there, and more importantly, you're already connected to the source of all connection. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is simply accepting that your awakening is both deeply personal and universally shared, both uniquely yours and part of something infinitely larger than yourself. In the silence between words, Thoth whispers one of his most profound truths. Those who see clearly become mirrors for humanity, not by choice, but by nature. When you strip away the layers of conditioning and stand in authentic awareness, you begin reflecting reality back to others with the same unwavering honesty as polished bronze reflects sunlight. Think about an actual mirror for a moment. It doesn't judge what appears before it. A mirror shows the beautiful face and the wounded one with equal clarity. It reflects joy and sorrow, truth and deception without adding its own commentary or trying to improve the image. The mirror simply is, a neutral witness that reveals what stands before it. This is what happens when you develop genuine sight. Your presence becomes that mirror. Not because you're trying to show people their flaws or enlighten them with your wisdom, but because clarity naturally reflects clarity. When someone encounters you, they're suddenly seeing themselves more honestly than they have in years. And this terrifies most people. We live in a world of carefully constructed masks. Everyone walks around with their professional face, their social media persona, their family role, their spiritual identity. These masks aren't necessarily lies, they're protective adaptations, ways of navigating a complex world, but they're still masks. And when someone encounters a genuine mirror, all those constructed identities become transparent. I've watched this phenomenon countless times. A person who's been lying to themselves about their marriage suddenly can't maintain the illusion when they're around someone who embodies authentic truth. The executive who's convinced himself his work has meaning finds that conviction crumbling in the presence of someone living with genuine purpose. The spiritual seeker who's been collecting concepts and techniques realizes they've been avoiding the very transformation they claim to want. This mirroring happens completely unconsciously. You're not trying to expose anyone or prove any points. You're simply being authentic, and that authenticity creates a field of truth around you. Your responses come from a place of genuine feeling rather than social programming. Your questions arise from real curiosity rather than conversational scripts. Your presence carries the weight of someone who has faced their own shadows and emerged more whole. But here's where the danger reveals itself. Most people prefer their illusions to uncomfortable truths. When they look into the mirror of your presence and see aspects of themselves they've been avoiding, their first instinct isn't gratitude, it's to shatter the mirror. History provides us with stark examples. Socrates wasn't executed for teaching false information. He was killed for asking questions that revealed how little people actually knew about their own beliefs. Jesus wasn't crucified for promoting hatred or violence. He was eliminated because his presence reflected a love so authentic, it exposed the hollowness of religious and political theater. Countless mystics, philosophers, and truth-tellers throughout history have faced persecution not for spreading lies, but for reflecting realities others couldn't bear to acknowledge. The pattern repeats because the mirror function threatens the foundation of unconscious living. When you encounter someone who has genuinely faced their own darkness and integrated it, your own avoided shadows become harder to ignore. When you meet someone living from authentic inner authority, your dependence on external validation feels suddenly childish. When you're around someone who has found genuine peace, your own inner chaos becomes impossible to deny. This is why developing the skill of gentle reflection becomes crucial for your own survival. The harsh mirror that forces confrontation often gets broken. The gentle mirror that invites self-recognition can transform lives without creating enemies. Watch how the greatest teachers throughout history have mastered this art. They didn't stand on street corners shouting about people's delusions. Instead, they told stories that allowed people to see their own patterns reflected in characters and situations. They used humor to slip insights past defensive barriers. They asked questions that led people to their own discoveries rather than imposing conclusions. The Buddha didn't tell people they were suffering. He created conditions where they could recognize their own suffering and its causes. Rumi didn't lecture about divine love. He wrote poetry that awakened the longing for that love within his readers. The most effective mirrors in history have learned to show truth in ways that feel like invitation rather than confrontation. But even with skillful reflection, you'll still encounter those who want to destroy the mirror rather than face what it shows. This is where maintaining your own center becomes essential. When someone projects their discomfort onto you, calling you judgmental, arrogant, or threatening, remember that their reaction is about what they're seeing in themselves, not about who you actually are. The responsibility of being a clear mirror is immense. Your authenticity affects others whether you intend it or not. A single genuine interaction can plant seeds that transform someone's entire trajectory, or it can trigger defensive reactions that cause them to retreat further into unconsciousness. This is why the goal was never to change people. The goal is to remain authentic while giving others the space to see themselves more clearly when they're ready. Some will thank you for the reflection. Others will blame you for showing them what they weren't prepared to see. Both responses have nothing to do with you and everything to do with their relationship to truth. Learning to be a gentle mirror, one that reveals without demanding, shows without forcing, reflects without distorting, may be one of the most important skills for anyone walking the path of authentic awareness. Because in a world that prefers illusion, those who reflect truth clearly become both the greatest gift and the greatest threat to human consciousness. The mirror simply shows what is. What people do with that reflection remains their choice entirely. You know what's fascinating about mirrors? They never try to convince you of anything. They simply reflect what's there, without argument, without force, without needing you to agree with what you see. And in that quiet reflection, they reveal more truth than 1,000 passionate speeches ever could. This is the paradox that Thoth understood so deeply. The most profound truths cannot be taught in the traditional sense. They can only be lived, embodied, and allowed to speak through the quality of your presence in the world. There's an ancient Taoist wisdom that cuts right to the heart of this. Those who know do not speak, and those who speak do not know. At first glance, this might seem contradictory. After all, here I am speaking to you about expanded awareness. But the deeper truth is that real knowledge transcends words. It lives in the space between thoughts, in the quality of your actions, in how you move through the world when nobody's watching. Think about your own experience for a moment. When someone tries to convince you of something, really pushes their perspective on you, what happens? You resist, don't you? Even if part of you recognizes truth in what they're saying, that forceful energy creates an automatic defensive response. It's as if the human psyche has a built-in allergy to being told what to think or see. This is why the awakened sages throughout history rarely engaged in debates or arguments about truth. They understood something profound. Awakening cannot be handed to another person like a gift. It must emerge from within, like a seed breaking through its shell when the conditions are right. You cannot crack that shell from the outside without destroying what's trying to emerge. Thoth spoke of the universe as fundamentally playful, consciousness hiding from itself so it could have the joy of rediscovering itself in endless forms and experiences. Each person's journey of awakening is part of this cosmic game of hide and seek. When you try to shortcut someone else's process, you're essentially trying to spoil the game, to give away the punchline before they're ready to laugh. But here's where it gets interesting. When you stop trying to teach and start simply living from expanded awareness, something magical happens. Your life becomes the teaching. Your responses to everyday situations become invitations for others to consider new possibilities. Let me give you some concrete examples of what this looks like. When chaos erupts around you, maybe there's a crisis at work, or family drama, or some unexpected challenge, and you remain centered and calm, people notice. They don't necessarily understand why you're not reactive, but something in them recognizes that peaceful presence. A seed gets planted. When someone treats you poorly, and you respond with genuine compassion instead of defensiveness or retaliation, it creates a crack in their certainty about how the world works. They expected you to play the familiar game of attack and counterattack. Your unexpected response opens a doorway to a different way of being. When you find sincere joy in simple moments, really appreciating a sunset, laughing genuinely at something funny, showing authentic interest in another person's story, you demonstrate that happiness doesn't depend on external circumstances. People around you start to wonder what you know that they don't. Perhaps most powerfully, when you treat apparent enemies with kindness, not as a strategy or technique, but from a genuine recognition of shared humanity, you challenge one of the deepest programs running in human consciousness, the program that says we must divide the world into allies and threats. These responses naturally intrigue people because they're unexpected. They plant seeds of possibility without triggering the resistance that comes with direct teaching. There's no argument to defend against, no ideology to reject. There's just a living example of a different way to be human. But let's be honest about the challenge here. When you see others suffering from illusions that you could potentially help them recognize, staying silent can feel almost cruel. You watch someone you care about making the same painful mistakes over and over, trapped in patterns of thinking that create unnecessary suffering. The urge to intervene, to share what you see, can be overwhelming. This is where wisdom becomes essential. There's a delicate balance between compassion and respect for another person's journey. True compassion sometimes looks like allowing people to learn through their own experience, even when you could spare them some pain. It's recognizing that their struggles might be exactly what they need for their own growth and awakening. When people do ask you directly about your perspective, and they will, because authentic presence is magnetic, you can share insights in ways that encourage their own discovery, rather than creating dependency. Instead of saying, "This is the truth," you might say, "This is what I've noticed in my experience," or, "Have you ever considered that maybe?" You become a fellow explorer rather than an authority figure. Look at the great teachers throughout history. Buddha didn't go around trying to convince people they were suffering unnecessarily. He simply sat under a tree, radiating peace, and those who were ready came to him. Jesus didn't argue theology with everyone he met. He lived with such love and presence that people were naturally drawn to understand what made him different. Lao Tzu disappeared into the mountains and had to be convinced to write down the Tao Te Ching before he left. The most profound teaching happens through presence, not explanation. This doesn't mean you become passive or indifferent to others' well-being. It means you learn to hold the paradox of caring deeply while not being attached to outcomes. You offer your authentic presence as a gift to the world, without needing anyone to validate or understand it. When you live this way, something remarkable happens. You gradually shift the energy field around you. People feel different in your presence, though they might not be able to articulate why. You become a tuning fork, vibrating at the frequency of expanded awareness, and others begin to resonate with that frequency at levels they may not consciously recognize. Your primary responsibility isn't to wake others up, it's to stay awake yourself, to embody truth so completely that it radiates naturally from your being. This approach is ultimately far more effective than any amount of preaching or arguing could ever be, because truth, when it's lived authentically, doesn't need to convince anyone of anything. It simply is, like sunlight that warms everything it touches without effort or intention. ready to explore the final piece of this puzzle? The last section reveals how to maintain your expanded awareness while navigating a world that often seems designed to pull you back into unconsciousness. There's something profound that happens when you finally stop running, when you realize that everything you've been chasing, success, validation, the perfect life, has been with you the entire time. It's in this moment that Thoth's greatest teaching reveals itself, not through solemn wisdom or grave pronouncements, but through laughter, sacred laughter. Throughout history, the deepest mystics have been known for their joy, their ability to find humor in the cosmic dance that takes itself so seriously. The Zen masters with their playful koans, Rumi spinning in ecstatic delight, even Jesus telling stories that turned conventional wisdom upside down with a wink. They weren't laughing because life was trivial. They were laughing because it was so sacred, so beautifully orchestrated, that the only appropriate response was wonder and mirth. Think about what happens when you realize you've been chasing your own shadow your entire life. All that striving, competing, worrying about what others think, it's like spending decades trying to catch something that was attached to you all along. The moment you turn around and see the shadow for what it is, you can't help but laugh. Not a bitter laugh, but the gentle laughter of recognition. Oh, you think, I've been playing hide and seek with myself. This realization brings something remarkable, both profound humility and inexplicable joy. You stop running towards some imaginary treasure in the future and discover the wealth that's been sitting in your present moment all along. Your breath, your awareness, the simple fact that you exist in this impossible universe. These aren't consolation prizes while you wait for real life to begin. They are real life. But here's where it gets interesting. This perspective doesn't make you passive or disconnected. Instead, it transforms how you move through daily life. You still participate fully. You work, you love, you create, you care about outcomes. But now there's a twinkle in your eye, a lightness in your step that recognizes the playful nature of existence. You're like an actor who's become so skilled that they can be completely present in their role while simultaneously aware they're in a play. This balance between engagement and detachment isn't about not caring. It's about caring deeply while holding your attachments lightly. You can pour your heart into a project while knowing that success or failure doesn't define your worth. You can love someone completely while understanding that trying to control them would destroy what you're trying to preserve. You participate in the game while remembering it's a game. The ancient Hermetic texts speak of this as recognizing that you are both the dreamer and the dreamed, the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer. When this truth settles into your bones, it dissolves the fundamental anxiety of separation that drives so much human suffering. You realize you were never actually separate from what you were seeking. The peace you wanted, the love you craved, the sense of belonging you pursued, these weren't external destinations but qualities of your own being. This recognition brings a particular kind of freedom. You stop trying to prove yourself because you realize there's nothing to prove. You stop defending your position because you understand that your true nature doesn't require defense. You stop seeking approval because you've found the source of validation within yourself. It's not that you become indifferent to others, quite the opposite. You become more genuinely loving because you're no longer trapped by the desperate need to get something from them. But how do you share this joy without diminishing others' journey? How do you live from this place of sacred laughter without becoming insufferably enlightened? The key is remembering that everyone is exactly where they need to be in their own cosmic joke. Your role isn't to wake people up, it's to be so authentically yourself that you give others permission to do the same. When someone complains about their problems, you don't lecture them about the illusion of suffering. You listen with genuine compassion, knowing that their struggle is real for them right now. When someone gets caught up in drama, you don't roll your eyes with superior detachment. You offer your presence, your stability, your quiet reminder that there's another way to see things. You become like that friend who can find humor in any situation, not by making light of pain, but by helping others see the bigger picture. You're the one who can laugh at your own mistakes, who doesn't take yourself too seriously, who brings levity to tense situations without invalidating anyone's experience. For those of you watching this who recognize yourself in these words, who feel that familiar stirring of remembrance, embrace this gift of seeing differently. Hold your insights lightly, like holding a butterfly. The moment you grasp too tightly, trying to prove how awakened you are, you crush the very thing you're trying to preserve. Seek out others who share this awareness. They're everywhere once you know how to look, the ones with that quiet joy, that gentle humor, that ability to be fully present without needing to be anywhere else. You'll recognize each other by the laughter in your eyes, the ease in your presence, the way you can discuss the deepest truths while sharing a cup of coffee. Remember, your role is to embody truth rather than convince others of it. Live your joy so authentically that others become curious about its source. Let your peace be so genuine that it creates space for others to find their own. Be so comfortable with uncertainty that you help others relax into the mystery of existence. The danger of seeing what others don't, this expanded awareness that can feel isolating, is also its greatest gift. It leads to authentic freedom and the ability to love more deeply, because you're no longer trapped by illusions of separation. You realize that everyone you meet is another face of the same consciousness that looks out through your eyes. You are not alone in this recognition. The universe itself is awakening through you, celebrating its own existence through your expanded awareness. Your laughter is the cosmos laughing at its own elaborate game of hide and seek. Your joy is life itself recognizing its own beauty. Your peace is the eternal stillness that underlies all movement, finally coming home to itself. This awakening isn't just personal liberation, it's a gift to collective consciousness. Every person who stops running, who finds the treasure within, who learns to laugh at the cosmic joke, makes it easier for others to do the same. We're all connected in this grand awakening, this remembering of what we've always known but temporarily forgot. If this video resonated with you, if you felt that spark of recognition, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."